Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a retired Army engineer escapes to the wilds of North Carolina to build his dream home, he finds peace until a ruthless HOA tries to steal his land with lies, forged maps, and a fake marina. But they picked the wrong man to mess with. This is war, and he's not backing down. They say some men run away to the mountains to find peace. I didn't run. I walked with a damn clear purpose. Back in 2016, after hanging up my architect's license and retiring from the Army Corps of Engineers, I bought 17 acres of raw forest land in the Appalachian foothills of North Carolina. No neighbors, no cell towers, no rules. Just thick pine trees, a sloping hill, and a private stretch of rocky shoreline curling around a glacier-fed lake so cold it made your bones shiver. That land had no HOA, no zoning restrictions, and most importantly, no one telling me what I could or couldn't build. The deed was clean. I made sure of it. Surveyed it myself, triple-checked the county records, even dragged my old buddy Frank, a no-bullshit real estate attorney, out there to make sure the border lines weren't fuzzy. They weren't. That land was a fortress, legally and physically. I named it Clearwater Point, not for vanity, but because every man's sanctuary deserves a name. The first year, I lived in a beat-up airstream while clearing brush and hauling in supplies. A lesser man might have hired a crew. I didn't want a crew. I wanted solitude. I laid every stone in that foundation with my own hands. I felled trees, milled them into beams, designed every angle of that cedar and stone house like it was the last blueprint I'd ever draw. It took 8 years, on and off, season by season, to build what I now call home, a 2-story cabin with a wraparound porch, wood stove, handmade doors, solar arrays tucked discreetly into the slope, a rainwater cistern, a dock I carved myself from, driftwood and pressure-treated planks, and a sauna that smells like heaven's sweat lodge. There were no neighbors within shouting distance, and even if there were, I didn't shout. The lake was mine. Well, at least the shore I legally owned. I filed a literal rights affidavit with the county registrar, just in case anyone ever tried to claim communal access. My land was private, pristine, and defensible. The only sound most mornings was wind through the trees and the low creak of my dock swaying in the water. Sometimes deer came right up to the porch and stared at me like I was the intruder. It was perfect. But about 2 years ago, I noticed something changing on the southern ridge, about 2 miles down the slope. First came the distant beeping of earth movers, then a fleet of trucks hauling in lumber and steel. At first, I assumed it was a one-off development, maybe a rich family building a lake house of their own. But then came the signs, big vinyl banners flapping in the wind like a declaration of war. Coming soon, Lakewood Pines, luxury living on the water. They weren't actually on the water. They were well below the ridge, on land that was technically upstream and well out of sight from my place. But the marketing spin was clear. Live near nature. Near, not in. Whatever. I ignored it. Let the city folks have their vinyl-clad twins and artificial beaches. I had stone, fire, and silence. Let them play shuffleboard and whine about HOA paint codes. I didn't care. They were too far away to matter. For a while. By year 8, Clearwater Point was complete. I wasn't rich by any stretch, but I had savings, a pension, and no debt. I'd started brewing my own beer, selling handmade furniture through a local artisan coop, and documenting wildlife patterns for a conservation study. I didn't need much, and more than that, I'd earned this life. Every nail, every muscle ache, every sunrise seen from that dock, it was all mine. Then one morning, just as the snow started to melt and the trails turned to sludge, I found something pinned to my front gate. Not a bare warning or weather notice. It was an envelope. Inside, a printed letter on thick stock paper. Dear resident, you are hereby invited to attend the next HOA board meeting of Lakewood Pines to discuss issues related to your property's status and shoreline compliance. Your cooperation is expected. Failure to attend may result in administrative action. Underneath was a gold-trimmed business card that read, Karen Copeland, President, Lakewood Pines HOA, preserving our community's harmony, and scrawled in pen on the back, please come. The board is very interested in your land. Let's avoid escalation. I stared at the letter for a full minute before chuckling. It wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Lakewood Pines was a full 2 miles down the hill, separated by dense trees, an old creek bed, and a private logging trail I kept gated. My property had never been part of their plans, because it was purchased long before Lakewood Pines even existed. Their entire HOA map ended a good 500 feet below my southern boundary. This wasn't just an administrative error, this was a feeler. I walked inside, poured a cup of coffee, and reread the letter. Then I tossed it in the fireplace. I called the number on the card later that afternoon. A woman answered, clipped, polite, smug. "This is Karen Copeland." "Ms. Copeland, this is James Rhodes. I believe you left something on my property gate." "Ah, Mr. Rhodes, yes. I'm so glad you called. The board has some concerns about the placement and compliance of your structures with shoreline ordinances. We'd really appreciate your presence at the meeting next Thursday." "I'm not a member of your HOA." She was silent for a beat. Well, that's actually under review." "Under review by who?" "Our zoning advisor believes there may have been a recording error during the initial subdivision filings. We're simply trying to clarify jurisdiction." "Try all you want," I said. "I've got county records, deeds, surveys, and maps. I'm not part of Lakewood Pines, never have been, never will be. If you or your board step foot past my gate again, I'll consider it trespassing." Another pause. "There's no need to be aggressive, Mr. Rhodes. We're trying to resolve this peacefully. You should have started by staying on your side of the ridge." Then I hung up. That was the first time I heard her voice. It wouldn't be the last. For the next week, I almost forgot about Karen's call. Almost. But the peace didn't return. It was replaced by something else. A kind of shadow. Like the silence in the woods had changed. Too even, too aware. As if something just out of sight had started watching. A few days later, I spotted an SUV idling near the forest entrance. Emblazoned on the side was the Lakewood Pines HOA logo, parked neatly just outside my property line, engine humming. Then gone. Technically not a crime, but it felt like they were measuring me, like I was already a blueprint. Not long after, the next envelope arrived, this time with a formal seal and letterhead. Notice of violations regarding lakeside construction standards, signed by Lakewood Pines HOA Inspection Committee. Not a single mention that I wasn't a member. Not a single acknowledgement that their jurisdiction ended a mile south of my property line. The listed violations were laughable. Unregistered sauna located on the lakeshore. Use of non-certified structural materials within southern visual corridor. Unapproved decking structure extending into shared vista zone. They'd even attached a photo, my dock, taken from the lake, from their boat. I wasn't laughing anymore. I printed the notice, slipped it into a red binder labeled bullshit, and sat down to draft my response. I attached copies of my land deed, the boundary survey, property tax receipts, and recent correspondence with the county registrar, all confirming that my land was privately owned, non-zoned, and purchased long before Lakewood Pines even existed. I mailed the entire package to Karen with a CC to the county's legal department. 3 days later, environmental inspectors showed up. 2 men in safety vests bearing the emblem of the North Carolina Environmental Landscape Compliance Unit. One of them stepped forward and stated flatly, "We've received a report of aggressive shoreline deforestation and disruption of aquatic balance due to unlicensed construction. Complaint filed by Lakewood Pines. HOAI offered them coffee and showed them the folder, drainage blueprints, soil safety certification from last year, full documentation of every lakeside project I'd ever touched." They nodded, took notes, snapped a few photos. One of them, as he climbed into the truck, even muttered, "Off the record, looks clean. But it feels like you've landed in someone's political meat grinder." A week later, the report came back. No violations found. Signed and sealed by the department. I sent a copy of the report to Karen and another to the district attorney's office. I included a short cover letter. Further attempts to extend external jurisdiction onto private property with fully registered ownership will be considered harassment, coercive land pressure, and legal grounds for litigation. Consider this formal warning of my intent to pursue civil action if such conduct continues. I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I found bright plastic survey stakes jammed into the soil along my forest path. Neon orange tape fluttering in the wind, the kind developers use right before excavation, scrawled across each one in black marker. Lot 85, Lakewood Pines Shore Expansion, survey pending. Lot 85. I didn't care what their fake master plan looked like. But if Lot 85 had sprouted on my land, they weren't just pushing boundaries. They were drawing an imaginary map that erased me. I yanked up every stake and threw them into the fire pit. Then I called Nate, an old friend and licensed land surveyor, asked him to walk the boundary with me. He arrived the next morning with his equipment. Quiet, efficient, no nonsense. We paced the lines, checked the coordinates, compared GPS to county maps. "You're solid," he said. "Every inch of this is yours. They've got no legal claim to a single blade of grass." I asked for a formal statement, signed, notarized, and backed up in my files. It should have ended there, but I wasn't the first person Karen had tried to steamroll into silence. I was just the first one who stood his ground and refused to get out of the way. A month later, I received an envelope that looked different from the HOA garbage I'd gotten used to ignoring. This one had a seal from the county zoning office, embossed, official, and unmistakably real. I knew that seal. I'd seen it when I filed my original deed. Inside was a letter that nearly made me spit out my coffee. "This notice is to inform you that your parcel, formerly registered as an unincorporated tract, has now been designated as part of the Lakewood Pines Special Residential District, per Administrative Action 19-ZP7, recorded March 18th. It went on with zoning codes and annexation terms, citing new community management responsibilities, including shoreline access easements, shared resource utilization, and, the kicker, transition of exclusive property rights into shared district privileges, under HOA oversight." At the bottom was a signature, a zoning official I didn't recognize, and a digital stamp that looked half real, half slapped together in Photoshop by someone who thought fake government fonts made a document legitimate. My gut knew before my lawyer confirmed it. This was a forgery. I drove down to the county office first thing the next morning, parking in the mud lot behind the building I knew too well. Inside, the zoning clerk, a woman named Monica, who once helped me reprocess a title boundary, took one look at the letter and frowned. This didn't come from us. Mind double-checking? She did. Pulled up my parcel, reviewed zoning logs, administrative actions, nothing. No record of Action 19-ZP7, no vote, no filing, no committee discussion. I asked to speak to the department head, and she agreed. We sat down with the zoning director, an older guy named Gilman who'd been around longer than most of the county infrastructure. His face turned from annoyed to deeply concerned in a matter of minutes. "This isn't a clerical error," he said quietly. "This is fabricated. It uses elements from our older forms, but it's not official. And this signature at the bottom?" He tapped it. "That's not anyone from our office. Never was." I asked him to provide a signed statement to that effect. He agreed. I left that office with two things, a notarized letter confirming the fraud and a new fire burning in my chest. But when I got back home, the damage had already begun. In my mailbox was a printed newsletter from Lakewood Pines HOA. I hadn't subscribed to anything, which meant someone hand-delivered it. Across the top, bold and centered, exciting new access coming soon. Underneath, a full-color rendering of what looked like a boat launch, built right on my shoreline. The caption read, "Plans are underway for a shared-use marina and guest lodge located at the secluded lakefront zone, now officially part of Lakewood Pines. Construction pending final approval." I stared at the image. They had mapped my dock, my sauna, my boathouse, labeled them Phase 1 structures in a fictitious development plan. They even had a projected timeline, which included a road access path that cut directly through my firewood stack. I read the fine print. HOA President Karen Copeland has secured preliminary commitments from 2 trusted development partners and is currently finalizing permitting with the county. I don't know what pissed me off more, the audacity or the sloppiness. I called my lawyer, Frank. He listened, sighed, and said, "We're not just dealing with HOA overreach anymore. This is land fraud." I'm calling a friend in the DA's office. 2 days later, we sat down with Assistant District Attorney Raymond Hill, a serious, methodical guy who handled most of the county's property disputes. Frank handed over the forged letter, zoning confirmation, HOA newsletter, and all the maps. Hill took one look and said, "Where'd she get the access?" Frank leaned forward. "Her ex-husband used to work in the county cadastral records department. Retired last year, that's our working theory. She either pulled old templates or convinced someone to push this through the wrong channels." Hill nodded slowly. "I've seen HOA wars before, But this is organized. He promised to open an inquiry. In the meantime, Frank and I prepared a cease and desist packet. We sent it to the Lakewood Pines HOA board, to Karen directly, and to both developers listed in the newsletter. Only one of the developers responded. His assistant emailed a bland legalese letter claiming preliminary interest, but no signed agreement. A soft walkback. They knew they were playing with fire, but Karen, she doubled down. A week later, a real estate ad appeared online for exclusive lakefront investment opportunity, showing my dock again, promising soon-to-be accessible private marina privileges in Lakewood Pines district expansion. I filed an emergency injunction through the county court, backed by Frank, zoning director Gilman, and the DA's preliminary fraud report. While we waited for the hearing, I put up new signage. Private property, not for sale. Not part of any HO trespassers will be photographed, documented, and prosecuted. I also added 2 more trail cams. Infrared, motion activated, linked to my phone. I didn't know what they were planning next, but I was done waiting to find out. It started just before 6 in the morning. The air was still, the lake calm, mist curling off the surface like breath on glass. I was nursing my first cup of coffee on the porch, watching a pair of loons drift along the edge of the water. Peace, the kind that takes years to build and seconds to shatter. Then came the rumble. At first, I thought it was a distant storm, the kind that crawls low over the hills. But no, it was the crunch of heavy treads grinding through gravel and root. And it was close. Too close. I threw on my boots, grabbed my rifle, not loaded, but very visible, and stepped off the porch. By the time I reached the tree line near the southern boundary of my property, I saw them. A bulldozer, 2 pickup trucks, a flatbed trailer loaded with fencing material, and about half a dozen men in reflective vests, 2 of whom wore bright white polo shirts with the logo I'd come to despise, Lakewood Pines HOA Development Committee. They were clearing brush, my brush, bulldozing a path toward the lake, right through a section of my fence that had been removed, cut clean and neatly stacked to the side like they thought they were doing me a favor. One guy with a clipboard turned and noticed me. He waved like this was just another Tuesday. "Morning," he shouted. "We're getting started a little early. Hope that's all right." I didn't answer. I walked straight toward him, every step calculated, the rifle in plain view across my chest. He clocked it but didn't flinch. "Can I ask what the hell you're doing on my land?" I said, already reaching for my phone with my free hand. He blinked. This is the site for the Lakeshore Commons project. We've got authorization from the HOA and the zoning board." "You have jack shit," I snapped, raising the phone. "And unless you want to explain this to a sheriff, I suggest you stop moving that blade and turn off your damn trucks." He tried to hold his ground. "We were told this land is now district managed. We've got paperwork." I dialed. "Then get ready to show it to the county judge. You're trespassing, and I've already filed for an injunction." I didn't even finish the call before another car pulled up. Sleek, white, with black rims. I knew that car. Karen Copeland stepped out like a pageant queen entering the stage. Tan slacks, lavender blouse, clipboard in hand, and a smug smile that could peel paint. "Mr. Rhodes," she called, walking toward me like we were about to settle a property line with lemonade and a handshake. "There's no need for theatrics. We're simply proceeding with what's already been approved. If you'd attended the meeting, we could have handled this more collaboratively." I lowered the phone. "You've got 30 seconds to explain what the hell you think you're doing." She didn't miss a beat. "Your property, as you've been informed, has been incorporated into the Lakewood Pines Special District. We extended every opportunity for voluntary transition. You declined. At this point, the HOA is exercising its jurisdictional rights over communal development." I laughed, the bitter kind of laugh that starts deep in your gut when logic finally collapses under the weight of insanity. "You forged zoning documents. You submitted maps with structures you don't own. You posted my dock on real estate listings. And now you send a construction crew onto my land to break ground on a fantasy marina." Karen gave a small, practiced frown. "Mr. Rhodes, those are serious accusations, and your aggressive behavior is being documented." "You want documentation?" I pulled a folded packet from my back pocket. "The injunction, stamped by the district court just 2 days ago. Here's a signed order from the judge halting all activity on this property. Any further intrusion is criminal contempt." I handed it to the clipboard guy. He looked at it, then at Karen. Karen didn't flinch, but I saw the twitch in her jaw. "This isn't over," she said flatly. "It is for you." The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, 2 deputies. I knew one of them, Deputy Holtz, who'd helped me with a break-in 2 years back. He took one look at the equipment on my land, then at the documents in my hand. "You've got an injunction. Stamped and sealed." "All right." He turned to the crew. "Pack it up. Now." The bulldozer shut off. The workers began loading materials back onto the trailer. Karen stood off to the side, jaw tight, eyes sharp, like she was memorizing the scene for a future revenge novel. 2 men were detained, one for refusing to leave, another for violating a prior suspended license in a separate county. Turns out, Karen's contractors were more bargain bin than professional. Before they left, Holtz turned to Karen and said, "If this happens again, it's you we'll be arresting." She didn't respond, just climbed back into her SUV, slammed the door, and peeled off. I stood there in the churned-up mud of what had once been my trail, watching them go. My heart was still racing, my palms were sweating, but my jaw was set like stone. They thought they could wear me down, that I'd fold when pressure came. They had no idea who they were dealing with. In the days after the bulldozer incident, my land felt different, not just scarred, contaminated. The air was still the same crisp pine and water scent I'd come to love, but the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt like something was waiting just beyond the tree line, watching. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was instinct. Either way, I trusted it. Frank, my lawyer, wasn't wasting time. After the cease and desist and the injunction, we moved straight to discovery. He wanted to drag every relevant document, map, and internal communication from the HOA's records. The county court granted us a preliminary motion citing reasonable suspicion of fraudulent activity tied to municipal zoning misrepresentation. Fancy way of saying, we're not imagining this. But it wasn't enough. We needed more than suspicion. We needed a nail, a big, ugly, undeniable nail, to hammer into Karen's coffin. That's when Frank asked me a question that hadn't crossed my mind. "Any chance you've got footage?" I did. The trail cams I'd set up after the fake zoning notice had been running non-stop. I hadn't reviewed all of it. I didn't have the stomach to sit and rewatch every squirrel and raccoon that wandered past. But with what had happened, it seemed worth digging through. 3 hours in, I found it. 2 weeks before the bulldozer arrived, 2 figures in business casual, male and female, walking the edge of my property at dusk. The woman was unmistakably Karen. The man was stockier, short-cropped gray hair, khakis, and a tucked-in shirt. He carried a binder. They didn't speak much, just pointed, nodded, walked along the boundary lines like they were conducting a private tour. I clipped the footage, enhanced the stills, and sent them to Frank. "Bingo," he texted back. "That's Brent Copeland, her ex-husband, former county land records analyst, retired last year after 30 years. I'm betting the fake zoning letter used a form template from his time there." We had a lead. Frank passed everything to Ada Hill. Hill quietly launched an internal investigation, and that's when the real rot started surfacing. One of Hill's investigators, a wiry guy named Timmons, reached out for a quiet chat. We met at a diner off the highway. He slid a manila folder across the table, like we were in some spy thriller. Inside were copies of 3 documents, a zoning boundary reclassification draft, a scanned approval letter signed by a fictitious deputy administrator, and a map with parcel overlays, all traced to a hidden subfolder in the planning department's document management system. They hadn't gone through official approval channels. Someone had injected them into the system manually. "Who had access to that system?" I asked. Timmons shrugged. "That's the part we're checking. Logs are messy. But here's the thing. The document templates used are over 15 years old. No one uses them anymore, except people who used to work here back then." He nodded. Bingo. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't sitting still. Lakewood Pines HOA began sending out more newsletters, now with an added note about ongoing legal delays concerning the lakefront expansion. She was painting me as a rogue squatter. She even held a community meeting where she claimed I was uncooperative, aggressive, and withholding land that was supposed to be shared. But the real bomb dropped when Hill called. "We found the payments." 2 separate wire transfers from a development company to an account linked to a holding firm Karen had registered under her maiden name. The notes on the transfers were chilling. Securing lakefront access rights, Phase 1 buy-in. One of the developers had paid $75,000 up front. The other had sent a preliminary $50,000. She wasn't just making noise. She was selling my land. Hill moved fast. A subpoena was issued for HOA financial records. A temporary freeze was placed on all transactions involving the Lakewood expansion. And then came the formal letter. The county would be launching a full criminal investigation into the HOA's leadership for attempted land fraud, forgery, and unlawful real estate solicitation. Still, Karen didn't blink. Instead, I received another notice, this time claiming I was now in active violation of community rules for failing to maintain public easement pathways and for having an unapproved structure adjacent to a shared water feature. That unapproved structure, my dock, built with my hands, on land I owned outright. I walked down to it that evening, the sun melting into the lake like warm copper. The dock creaked gently under my boots. I sat there with a beer in one hand and my dog at my side, watching the last light fade. They could keep sending their papers, their threats, their made-up rules, but I wasn't going anywhere. I had the truth. I had the land. And now, finally, I had the law waking up. By the time the subpoenas hit, I could feel the shift in the air, like watching storm clouds gather over the mountains, calm on the surface, but electric underneath. Karen had gone quiet, too quiet. No more notices, no more construction crews, no more thinly veiled threats about community alignment, which, frankly, worried me more than the noise ever did. Then, one Thursday morning, I drove down the gravel road from town after picking up supplies. When I rounded the bend near the southern border of my land, I slammed the brakes so hard the tailgate banged. Right there, right on my land, a bright white sign in fresh concrete, future site of Lakewood Pines Guesthouse and Marina, coming summer. Underneath it, the HOA logo. Beneath that, 3 phone numbers and a developer's name. They had poured cement. Installed the sign. On my land. Again. I stepped out, took photos from every angle, then tore the thing out with my winch, hauled it straight up the hill, and dropped it at the sheriff's office like a war trophy. Sheriff Dale met me with that tight-lipped look he wore when trying not to laugh, but also deeply concerned. "Didn't they already get the message?" he asked. "Oh, they got it, but they didn't like it." Dale made a call. An hour later, an officer served the HOA office with a formal warning, direct violation of the court order, another strike. But I knew Karen wasn't acting alone anymore. This had gone past petty HOA territory and into organized grift. Frank confirmed it the next morning. The development company Karen was working with had formally filed a petition to review and confirm the status of the disputed parcel, my land, with the zoning committee. Their claim? That it had been unofficially annexed due to prolonged adjacency and intended integration. Invented legalese, Frank muttered, flipping through the paperwork. They're trying to delay court action long enough to break ground. If they pour foundation, they'll argue value was created and sue for easement rights. They're trying to bait me into reacting. Yep, don't take it, but I couldn't just sit. So I called a contact, Lorna, a friend from my military days, now working as an investigator for a land use watchdog group. Within 48 hours, she pulled records, drone photos, land assessments, everything. What she found nearly made me spit coffee across the kitchen. Karen had doctored satellite overlays. In the documents her HOA submitted to the zoning board, they had inserted altered maps where my land was labeled as Undeveloped Community Access Zone, complete with a fake parcel number. She'd created a phantom plot on top of mine. But the best part? One of the altered maps had a metadata tag still embedded in the PDF file. It traced back to a personal account linked to Karen Copeland. The amateur hour mistake of a control freak in over her head. We handed everything to ADA Hill. He nearly dropped his pen. "I can indict on this," he said flatly. "Forgery, fraud, attempted theft of property. It's enough to push this into felony territory." And still, the HOA wasn't done. Late one night, motion sensors tripped near the dock. My cameras picked up 3 figures in hoodies carrying spray cans. They tagged the dock, my shed wall, and even left a sign nailed to a post. "Not yours." I sent the footage to the sheriff. By morning, one of the punks had been picked up. Teenager from Lakewood Pines bragging on Snapchat about marking the disputed zone. His dad, a board member of the HOA. They were getting desperate. Karen finally made contact again. Not through paper, not through law. In person. She showed up at the base of my driveway in broad daylight, arms folded, sunglasses on, 2 men behind her in matching polos. Contractors, security, thugs. Hard to tell. I walked down, phone recording in my shirt pocket. She didn't smile. "James, we're offering you a final chance to cooperate. The community has spoken. Your refusal to engage is seen as hostility. The community didn't build this land. You're isolating yourself from progress. This property could serve hundreds. This property already serves 1, and it's not for sale." She stepped closer. "You don't have to be so aggressive. We can settle this civilly." I pulled out the court notice of active litigation. "We are settling it in court." Her expression shifted, tense, but underneath, something flickered. Not rage, worry. The first crack in the mask. "Don't be stubborn, James. You're making this harder than it has to be." "Good," I said. "I want it to be hard. I want it to be impossible." She turned and left. I stood at the edge of the trees for a while after they were gone, listening. There was no wind, just the creak of my dock, the hum of cicadas, and the knowledge that the war had turned cold, but not quiet. 2 weeks later, my phone lit up with a call from Ada Hill that started with 4 words I'd been waiting months to hear. "We got the warrant." The county grand jury had reviewed everything. The doctored documents, the forged zoning letter, the satellite overlays, the fake parcel tag, and the wire transfers. It was more than enough. A raid was approved on the Lakewood Pines HOA office and on Karen Copeland's home. That same morning, 2 sheriff cruisers and a state investigator's SUV rolled up to her door. Hill had warned me it would be best if I stayed away, but I couldn't help myself. I kept a respectful distance, parked on a turnout above the Lakewood development, and watched through binoculars as uniformed officers carried out box after box of files, hard drives, and binders. At one point, Karen herself emerged in a cream-colored pantsuit and handcuffs, her perfect HOA smile long gone. She didn't look at the cameras, didn't look at anyone. She looked like a realtor whose open house just got condemned. Later that day, the news broke. Lakewood Pines HOA president arrested for land fraud, forgery, and racketeering in zoning conspiracy. Suddenly, I wasn't just the paranoid mountain man living off-grid. I was the guy who took on a corrupt HOA and won. The story exploded, first local, then regional, then national. I got calls from reporters, offers from documentary crews, podcasts begging for interviews. I ignored most of it. I wasn't interested in 15 minutes of fame. I just wanted my damn land left alone. But the attention brought more than just headlines. Emails and letters started rolling in from people in other counties, other states even, who had been bullied, cornered, or scammed by their HOAs. Some had lost homes. Others had fought in court for years. One guy from Georgia told me his HOA cut down his century-old trees because they were off-brand. Another in Arizona got fined for a garage color that was 2 shades off beige. I realized then what Karen tried to pull wasn't rare, it was systemic. Hill kept me updated as the investigation unfolded. Turns out Karen's scheme was deeper than we thought. She'd built a network of shell LLCs, registered to former clients, cousins, ex-in-laws, all designed to launder HOA development funds into private real estate acquisitions. She'd been buying up properties just beyond the HOA's original boundary, then slowly annexing them by filing fake zoning adjustments and pressuring homeowners to sell or comply. They found 6 families who had signed away land under threats of legal action. 2 were elderly couples. 1 was a single mom who'd been told she'd lose water access if she didn't sign. It made my blood boil. When the feds got involved, yes, federal, they reclassified parts of the case under RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That's usually reserved for mobs, cartels, and dirty unions. Karen had finally made the big leagues, just not in the way she wanted. Meanwhile, back at my place, things were still tense. Though the HOA office had been shut down and its assets frozen, some of the diehards hadn't gotten the memo. One morning, I found tire marks again on the forest path, like someone had tried driving in before turning back. I reinforced the trail with new boulders and motion-triggered floodlights. I was done being polite. The county issued a formal letter confirming that my land had never been under HOA jurisdiction and that any future claims by Lakewood Pines would be treated as harassment. I had it laminated and nailed to the gate. Then came the civil suit. My legal team, which now included a heavy hitter from Raleigh who smelled blood, filed a comprehensive claim against Lakewood Pines HOA, Karen Copeland, her known associates, and the developer companies that had participated in the fraud. We sued for property damage, emotional distress, legal fees, punitive damages, and fraudulent interference with private ownership. The first hearing was scheduled for late spring. Karen, now out on bail, tried to delay it with her usual arsenal of slick attorneys, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Mr. Rhodes," he said to me in court, "I commend your restraint in the face of what appears to be a systematic and calculated attempt to strip you of your legal rights. We'll ensure you receive your day in court." I nodded once. I wasn't there for applause. I was there for war, and for the first time since this all started, it felt like the law had finally remembered whose side it was supposed to be on. The final hearing took place on a Friday morning in a packed courtroom in the center of Asheville. By then, Karen Copeland's name had become a cautionary tale across the state. The courtroom had overflow seating, and reporters lingered by the courthouse steps like vultures waiting for a fresh headline. I arrived early, wore the same boots I'd poured concrete in 8 years ago, the same flannel I'd chopped cedar in. A quiet reminder, at least to myself, of who built what and why it mattered. Karen sat across the aisle at the defendant's table, flanked by 2 attorneys and a new hair color. Her usual smug posture had deflated into something brittle and performative, like someone still trying to pose for a camera no longer pointed at her. Frank leaned in. "They've offered a settlement." "How much?" "7 figures. I paused. No deal. Didn't think so. When the judge finally called the case, I stood and spoke for myself. I told them about the years I'd spent building that home. Not just the walls or the dock or the solar rig, but the peace, the silence, the work it took to carve something real out of wild land without asking anything from anyone. Then I told them about what it felt like to wake up one morning and realize someone was trying to unbuild it, piece by piece, not with hammers, but with paper, fake maps, pressure, intimidation, lies. "She didn't just try to steal my property," I said. "She tried to rewrite where it even existed, as if she could unmake me by redrawing a line on a map." Karen's lawyers tried the usual deflections, clerical mistakes, misunderstandings, ambiguous zoning records, but it all fell apart under cross-examination, especially when the prosecution pulled out the PDF file with the embedded metadata from Karen's own device. And when the HOA treasurer took the stand, clearly choosing immunity over loyalty, it was game over. "She said if we didn't push the acquisition through by summer, the developer would walk," he testified. "So she told me to submit the map changes and shred the originals." When the verdict came down, the courtroom went still. Guilty. On all counts. Karen Copeland received 10 years, 5 for fraud, 3 for document forgery, and 2 for criminal conspiracy. No parole for at least 6. Her developer partners were fined into oblivion. The HOA itself was ordered to dissolve and liquidate all its assets to pay damages to me and 6 other families whose land she'd tried to absorb. The court awarded me full restitution, punitive damages, and a written apology. Not that I ever opened the envelope. I left the courthouse without saying a word to the press. I drove straight back to my cabin, up the winding path, past the gate, through the trees that still knew my name. The sky was streaked with late spring light, the kind that slides between branches like warm glass. I stopped at the edge of the trail near the dock and got out of the truck. There, at the crest of the bluff, I placed the stone I'd been carving for weeks. 3 feet wide, 2 feet tall, smooth-faced granite hauled in piece by piece from the quarry. On it, I mounted a steel plaque, not ornate, just sharp and clear, built by hand. Not for sale, not for stealing. Private property, stay out. Below it, in smaller type, in memory of the 8 years it took to make something real, and the one woman who thought she could fake her way through it. I stood there a long time, listening to the lake. It was quiet, not the frightened kind of quiet I'd known during the worst of it, but the honest kind, the kind you earn after holding your ground and watching the storm break around you. I wasn't a hero, I didn't want to be one, but I was still here, and so was my home. That would be enough.